Welcome to edusati.com, your partner in education. In this lecture, we'll discuss the concept of strong and weak arguments. This concept is very important for the purview of debating, as there you need to understand the strength of any argument that has been passed. Imagine yourself standing in a courtroom or a boardroom. You're speaking either in favor of or against some motion. In such a situation, you obviously have a very calculated amount of time in which you have to prove your point. Thus, you need to be wise enough to choose your words. Since whatever you say has to be very concise, but it ought to have very grave meaning. Similarly, there would be another person standing who will contradict your points. He too would have his own set of opinions and he would give his arguments that would support his opinions and contradict that of yours. This percolates and we get a very never-ending debate. Since you speak something, the opponent would listen and then contradict. While in his contradiction, you catch some point that he spoke and then contradict that. This leads to a circumlocutory cycle, and thus you have a never-ending debate over some topic. This leads to 4 different situations based upon which a decision maker may pass a judgment. Now imagine that there's some person who's listening to both the people who are arguing, one in the favor of something and the other who's against, and the decision maker has to take some decision. Now, there may be 4 different situations upon which the decision maker can pass his judgment. The first situation is where your point is very strong. You have completely influenced the decision maker and he's completely agreeing with whatever you say. Because you were very reasonable in speaking and justifying yourself. So since you've justified yourself, your argument is strong, and the decision maker would say that your argument is strong, so he favors you. Another point is where your argument stands weak. That is, your reasonability of the points is not up to the mark. You cannot justify exactly whatever you are supporting. Thus, the decision maker would certainly take the decision against that of your argument. Another situation would be both the parties, that is you and the person who's contradicting you, both of you have strong points. Both of you can justify your opinions very, very nicely. In such a situation, the decision maker will be unable to decide what should be the decision. Likely, there would be a situation where both the parties, that is you and the person who's contradicting you, are unable to justify their opinion regarding the given problem. Thus, again, since both the arguments are weak, the decision would not be taken and the decision maker would be unable to make a decision. These 4 different situations are asked to you as the options in examinations. Now, what exactly happens in the examination is that there is a question followed by 2 different arguments. Now, the person who's attempting the question has to decide which of these given 2 arguments are strong or weak. And the options given are that only one argument is strong, that is the first argument is strong, or it is weak, that is the first argument is weak. Then there would be another option where both the arguments are strong, and lastly, none of the arguments is strong. And you have to mark your answer based on whatever you judge. Thus, in these questions, you're not acting as the person who is arguing, but as the person who takes the decision. For example, there's this question given to you that Should military training be made compulsory for all the students in India? And we have certain arguments either in favor of this statement or against them. Now, for example, the first argument says yes, it inculcates discipline among the citizens. The citizens would be more disciplined. The second argument says no, we live in a free country and only we ourselves should be allowed to make our career choices. There would be no intervention by any person outside who will help us to decide what we want to be in our life. The third argument says yes, it equips the citizens to be ready in the times of emergency. That is, if there's a time of emergency, the government need not to look for help because it knows that all the citizens are already military trained. And the last argument would say, no, our country cannot afford to provide such a training to such a vast number of students in our country. Now think about each of these arguments for a minute. You may pause the video at this point of time and think about each of the arguments and decide among these four arguments which ones are strong and which ones are weak. If you're the decision maker, which argument will you favor? Let's analyze each of the argument individually. The first argument says, yet, yes, it inculcates discipline among the citizens. Yes, it does inculcate discipline among the citizens, but is that the only way to inculcate discipline? How about the education system? How about what the students learn from their parents? Even those things help us to inculcate discipline. Thus, based on these counter arguments, we say that this given argument is weak. The next argument says, no, we live in a free country and only we ourselves should be allowed to make our career choices. Now think about a situation where a person is studying in a government institute. Now obviously there the government has the right to interfere and set quotas for a person based upon which a person decides what he can opt as a career option. Thus, even this argument is weak because there might be situations where government or other people interfere. Now, people may be dicey about I want to be this as well as I want to be that. Now, there would be people who will counsel such students to decide which option is better for this person. Let's analyze the third argument. It says, yes, it equips the citizens to be ready in times of emergency. Now, this is a very need-based argument. Now, if there is a situation where the country declares emergency, the situation of emergency, yes, the military training will help us. Obviously, it would. For example, take the example of Singapore or Switzerland. These are very small countries where the military training is mandatory for any and every student. Now, these countries, in the case of emergency or war, they need not to look for help from the other countries because they know that their own citizens are good enough. Thus, this argument is a very, very strong argument. The fourth argument says, no, our country cannot afford to provide such training to such a vast number of students in the country. Now, we're not mentioning the timeline. Might be when the financial outlook was studied, it was like 5 or 6 years before this statement was passed that should the military training be compulsory. Or it might be that we're not aware of what is the current financial condition of India. Thus, we cannot directly say that this argument is strong because we are unaware about the current economic status of India. Thus, this argument is weak. Now, based on our discussion, we just say that argument 3 is the only argument that is strong and the other 3 arguments are weak. Now let us understand what is the methodology by which we decide whether this argument is forceful enough to be known or termed as strong or not. The first thing, which is very important, is that this question does not ask your opinion. The question is about whether this argument is strong or not. As I've just told you, that you're not acting as the person who is passing the arguments, but you're acting as the person who's deciding upon the arguments. Thus, you not to think as per what would be your opinion given if this given situation arises. Thus, you'll never decide based on your emotional experiences. I'll write this, that please do not get emotional. The next thing is that since you're a decision maker, there's a tendency that you get biased. But we are to avoid such situations. We can never be biased towards one argument and decide it to be strong, neglecting the other one. So you can never be biased. You are to act unbiased. The third point that we must always keep in the mind is that if there's an argument based on some or the other established fact, that argument is always strong because that fact has always been proven. Now, this is an established fact that solar energy is the cause of life force on the earth. Now, if this is presented as an argument in any question, so obviously that is a strong argument. Why? Because this is an established fact. Everybody knows this, everybody believes in this. Another thing, that strong arguments must be logical and consistent. Now, mind it, they must be logical and consistent. For example, there's a question like that corruption has increased in our country and is deteriorating the development. And there's this argument, yes, that there should be stringent punishments for those people who are found corrupt. Now, this is a logical argument, and we must say and treat it as a strong argument. But if there's an argument like we must hang all people who are found corrupt, or we must decapitate such people who are found corrupt, now this is that we are getting over idealistic, and it seems simple, but it is a very, very controversial point. We cannot execute someone's head just because he was corrupt. Thus, we are to be logical and consistent, but please do not get over idealistic or simplistic. And as we've just said, do not include your own opinion or preference. Now, let's take the first question for our discussion. The statement is vegetarian diet better than non-vegetarian diet? Now, this is a very debatable topic. The people who favor vegetarian diet would say yes, it is better, and the people who favor non-vegetarian diet would say no, vegetarian diet is not better. Such a question you always tend to answer based on your own opinion. And as we've just discussed, we have to avoid getting into such a situation where you answer this question based on your opinion. As in, when you read this question, you think, yes, I'm a vegetarian, so I'll mark all the answers based on being a vegetarian. That is, all the answers that say, yes, a vegetarian diet is better, those are strong, and the others are weak. Now, we are not to give our own personal opinions, but check which of the given arguments are strong and then take a decision. Now let's discuss what are the arguments given for this statement. The first argument says yes, it is cheaper, and being a vegetarian would always be cost effective. The second says yes, it is healthy if taken in a balanced way by an overall healthy person. The third argument says yes, as most people in India are Hindus and prefer eating vegetarian, thus vegetarian diet is better. The fourth says yes, as non-vegetarian diet is rich in fat and can lead to heart problems, thus vegetarian diet is better. Fifth argument says no, in case a person has protein or fat deficiencies, non-vegetarian diet is better equipped to help him. The last argument says no, non-vegetarian diet offers variety and is more tasty. Now pause the video for some time and think about every given argument and then try and take the decision whether vegetarian diet is better than non-vegetarian diet or not. Now let us analyze the given arguments individually. The first argument says it is cheaper. Now, just because something is cheap, that means is it better? Obviously not. Now, there might be cases where vegetarian diet might be cheaper, but it is equally tasteless or it is not good for your health. Likewise, there might be cases where non-vegetarian diet being cheap is more good to have. So thus this is a very weak argument because it's very vague. So I'll reject it and I'll say it is a weak argument. The next argument says yes, it is healthy if taken in a balanced way by an overall healthy person. Now I'll mark the word if taken in a balanced way by an overall healthy person. Now, this means that if a person is nutrient deficient, that is, he suffers from some or the other deficiency of some mineral or vitamin, and he thus needs to take some or the other non-vegetarian dish, then he must go in for a non-vegetarian meal. Otherwise, if a person is healthy and he's eating balanced vegetarian diet, he need not to opt for non-vegetarian diet because all the nutrients are being provided by the diet he's taking. Thus, vegetarian diet is better. This explanation is very, very justifiable, and thus I term this argument as a strong argument. The next argument says yes, as most people in India are Hindus and prefer eating vegetarian, thus the vegetarian diet is better. Now, in the question, we're not talking about India. We're not at all talking about Hindus in India. We're not talking about India. And here, we start talking about India in this argument. Since we violate the scale, that here we're talking about all the vegetarians in general, and here we're just confining ourselves and being pertinent to Hindus in India, thus it violates the scale, and here we reject this argument saying that it is weak. The next argument says yes, as non-veg diet is rich in fat and can lead to heart problems. Now, we know that non-vegetarian diet is rich in fat and it might lead to heart problems, but it does not mean that anytime you eat non-vegetarian food, you'll have some or the other heart ailment. No. If taken in small quantities or in calculated quantities, even non-vegetarian diet gives you some or the other nutrients. Thus, this argument is weak. The next argument says, no, in case a person has protein or fat deficiencies, non-vegetarian diet is better equipped to help him. Now, this is an established fact. Everybody knows that if some person suffers from fat deficiency, the non-vegetarian diet would help him to recover. Since this is an established fact, we treat this argument as the strong argument. The last argument says, no, non-vegetarian diet offers variety and is more tasty, thus non-vegetarian diet is better. Now this is a very vague statement. Even vegetarian diet is tasty, even vegetarian diet offers variety. Now this is something upon that is very vague. Thus we regard this argument as a weak argument. Now the second question is that should euthanasia be allowed? Now this is a very good question because it tests your vocabulary as well. Now for a person who does not understand what exactly is euthanasia, he'll not be able to answer this question correctly. Euthanasia means mercy killing. Now in some cases, a person who's very critically ill and he's chronically ill, The doctors may help him to die. They may give him or inject or infuse something in his body, and he eventually would die a very peaceful death. This concept of mercy killing is known as euthanasia. Now, the first argument says yes, people are free to take decisions on their lives. And the second argument says no, even mercy death is a type of death as the state cannot allow it. Pause the video again and think about what would be your answer. What decision would you take based on the given arguments? Again, you may have a tendency to think emotionally but avoid doing so. Now, the first argument says yes, people are free to take decisions on their lives, but that does not mean that they can take decisions about their death. Uh, for example, if a person is very, very ill, he's chronically ill and he's suffering from something that he cannot recover soon from, or there is no treatment available for that as of now, and he thinks that better that he'll die, that is very wrong, because there might be a possibility that in the future there is a treatment available uh, for his ailment. So, and yet another point to contradict this argument is that even government has some or the other role in deciding whether or not to allow a person to die as per his will. That is the reason the government imposes fine on the people who are not wearing helmets while riding a two-wheeler. Thus, this argument would be regarded as a weak argument. The next argument says no, even mercy death is a type of death as the state cannot allow it. Now, even if you're killing somebody because he's chronically ill, that also means that you are killing him. You're taking life away from him. And killing someone is against the law. Thus, even euthanasia is equivalent to homicide or killing someone or a murder. Thus, this argument is a strong argument. Here are the explanations to the given arguments. The first argument, it says yes, this is a weak argument as a person cannot take all the decisions of his life alone. And there is an element of future as well. We do not know whether or not there would be a treatment that would be available in the future. And the second argument is strong because even mercy killing is a type of killing. Thus, we'll regard the second argument as strong and the first argument as the weak argument. The next statement asks, should certain education qualifications be made mandatory for the ministers? The argument says yes, even the lowest government job requires certain educational qualification. Then why not the highest jobs? And the second argument says no, because in a democratic setup, educational qualifications do not matter. Again, pause the video and think about both these arguments and try and decide which argument is strong. Let's discuss the explanation of the given arguments. Now, the first argument says, yes, even the lowest government job requires certain educational qualification, then why not for the highest job? Now, this is a strong argument. Why? Because the government has its certain agendas that a person must be this much qualified or this much experienced uh, to apply for so and so government job. Even for the job of a clerk, you need to be qualified enough. So, if even the lower jobs ask a person to be qualified, then why not the jobs that are for the higher officials or the ministers? And secondly, An educated minister would always be in a better position to decide whether something is right or wrong. Imagine a state where the finance minister has no idea what basic accounting or bookkeeping is, or a state where the minister of health is completely unaware about how many hospitals are there in the country, or what is the current status of the health standards in the given country. In such a case, the ministers would not be able to take correct decisions. Thus, educational qualifications are very much required for a minister. And these points make us to decide that yes, the first argument is a strong argument. The next argument says no, because in a democratic setup, educational qualifications do not matter. Now, there might be people who may think that this is true, that if it's a democratic setup, there must not be any bar upon whether or not you are qualified to be a minister or not. But it does not mean that you need no education, or you need not to be educationally qualified to become a minister. Democracy does not mean that you can be an illiterate or a person who is not educated and become a minister. Yes, another point, that if this thing was written as no, because in a democratic setup, educational qualifications or appropriate educational qualifications are required, then this was a strong argument. That is, if it was written that a minister must be appropriately qualified, then it was a strong argument. But then democracy does not mean that a non educated or uneducated person would be allowed to rule the country. Thus, it is a weak argument. Let's discuss another question which asks, should the manufacture of and sale of tobacco be banned? The first argument says yes, it is inherently harmful for the human body. Second argument says no, as the persons addicted to it will not be able to survive. And the third argument says no, as it is a big source of revenue for the government. Again, pause the video for some seconds and think about which of the given arguments are strong and which are weak. Let us discuss the explanation of either of these. Now, the first argument says yes, it is inherently harmful for the human body. This is an established fact. The people who consume a lot of tobacco are more subject to cancer than the person who does not consume tobacco. It is an established fact, thus, I treat it as a strong argument. The second argument says no, as the persons addicted to it will not be able to survive. Now, this is a very vague statement. We have de addiction camps, we have rehabilitation centers where people specifically go and join these centers so as they can leave their addiction and come over it easily and recover from this addiction thing. Thus, this argument is a weak argument. The last argument says no, as it is a big source of revenue for the government. Now, many of us might have thought that this is a weak argument because revenue is something that can be generated from the other sources as well. But this is a strong argument because it is a good source of income for the government. And that is the reason all these cigarettes have a statutory warning that consumption of tobacco is injurious to health. Thus, it is a very useful source from where the government earns a lot of money by giving a small indication that consumption of such a thing can lead to your death. Now, this is up to the person who is consuming this tobacco product, that whether or not he like to consume it even after reading the statutory warning. That is up to the person, but as per the revenues, as per the context of finances, this is a good source of revenue, thus I treat it as a strong argument. Another question asks, should there will be a uniform rate of income tax irrespective of personal income? That everybody has to pay the income tax, and all the more similar amount of income tax, uh, irrespective of how much is that person earning. The first argument says yes, this will substantially reduce the work on the IT officials, that is the income tax officials. And the second argument says no, this will reduce the net tax collection from the government. Now, if I analyze both the arguments, the first argument says yes, this will substantially reduce the work of IT officials. This is a weak argument because we're talking about the whole nation, and we're not only concerning ourselves for the workload on the IT officials. We have to keep in our mind that we must benefit all, including the IT officials, yes, but all. So we cannot directly reject an argument just because it is pertinent for the IT officials. So this is a weak argument. The second argument says no, this will reduce the net tax collections of the government. Now, this might sound a strong argument, but we are completely unaware whether or not this will happen. Now, see, making a uniform rate of income tax may lead to better income tax collection, or it might lead to worse income tax collection, which is unknown. We are completely unaware about whether there would be a benefit of this uniform rate, or would it be a male factor for the government. So, since we are unaware about this very thing, we cannot judge whether or not this will reduce the net tax collections, and thus I treat it as a weak argument. So, this is what is written in the explanation as well. A strong point that yes, like if there's a point that is written that no, there should not be a uniform rate of income tax irrespective of the personal income, because the government has some responsibility towards the weaker section. Now such a point would be treated as a strong point, because we obviously know that weaker sections would be unable to pay the income tax. Now, for example, a person who's just earning 1 lakh an annum would be certainly unable to give the income tax and then sustain himself for an year. So, this would be a strong point. This gets us to the end of the discussion about strong and weak arguments. If you still have any sort of doubts, you can go back to the starting of this video and redo the questions so as you get a better idea. And I would certainly advise that you solve many questions so as you get a hold of the topic. With this, I really thank you for watching this video. Thank you and have a great day.